Welcome, everyone, to this week's Rising Tide Foundation lecture, where we have the great privilege of hosting once again our dear friend Dr. Michael Clarage, who will be going through some very big ideas. I think everyone here is already familiar on some degree with Michael Clarage's work, both as a leading scientist within the electric universe world, which is currently pioneering new pathways to making discoveries into the geometry of the atom. He's been working with the Sapphire Project for some time now, where incredible results, as those who have been to the Sapphire Project website are aware, results that shouldn't be happening according to standard model atomic science is actually occurring. All sorts of phenomenon, from transmutations to other things, are being generated by a different approach to thinking about the nature of physical space-time are happening. And it's not just ivory tower thinking. There's actual practical work and experimental data that is backing this stuff up. So the world is moving in a variety of directions right now. The future, as we all know, is very underdetermined. There are a lot of bad ideas, but when there are bad ideas that I think are tolerated for too long, the consequence of a crisis offers opportunities as well. So when you see the effect of terribly wrong ideas that we thought were right, or at least were tolerated for too long, crises happen. And when there's a crisis, people can start moving their minds a little bit more. We've seen this all throughout history, to seek out what are solutions, what are ideas that will work, that are more in alignment with how the universe actually works. So the last presentation on an introduction to the electric universe was wonderful. It was very helpful for many people who listen to Michael Clarage go through what is this approach to the electric universe. I think some people have also seen the electrical shaping of biology, a series of videos Dr. Clarage has done to get across the implications on what is life really, what is living matter, and how is it being affected by electromagnetic fields, plasma, and all of the other seemingly invisible processes that are shaping our universe. So how does this change our study of life, and what type of solutions does that offer us? That's also those will both be links in the description box of this video. Today we're going to touch, I would imagine, on a variety of things, but most importantly, Dr. Clarage has not made himself susceptible to compartmentalized thinking, as so many have. And the idea of the metaphysical implications for fruitful scientific thinking are going to be investigated today, because I think that as we go into the coming generations, the coming 22nd century, if society is able to overcome a lot of the challenges plaguing us, we will have adopted a more fruitful mode of thinking, which will have certain characteristics. Some of those, I think, Dr. Clarage has a sense of. So I'm very much looking forward to this. I'm going to learn a lot as much as everyone. And as usual, put your names in the description box or in the chat box if you have a question or a thought when the lecture is over, and I will call upon you in queue. So with that, Dr. Clarage, it's all yours.
Great, thank you so much, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here again. This will largely be based on, the first part at least, based upon, if any of you saw the two recent videos I did. So I apologize in advance if you're very familiar with this. This topic, the way I'm going to start it, all started because I came across the work done by Michael Levin at Tufts University. Now, he's been doing his work there for over 10 years now, very well known in this field, developmental biology, but I just stumbled on it a year ago, and I thought this was just really a great field. His work was a great jumping off point to really discuss some very difficult ideas. It's still an open question in biology how any creature attains its shape. And I remember when I was in graduate school in the 90s, it was always just 5 years later. It was always 5 years down the road. In 5 years, we will understand it. In 5 years, we will understand it. In 5 years, we will understand it. But we don't. Our current tools, our current language for biology does not explain how any creature gets its shape, or any part of a creature its spine or its liver or its toes. It's all quite a mystery. And yet, last I checked, any textbook you pick up still states that DNA is responsible for the shape of creatures. And I've been looking at this topic probably for 40 years now, and it is surprising how little evidence there is for that assumption. It is a little shocking to see how it started. So in the 50s, when Watson and Crick, you know, so to speak, stole their data from Rosalind and promoted this theory of DNA, it was a strange mixture. They were very anti-religion, vociferously anti-religion, and they named their DNA idea the central dogma. And I was just like, that's a very strange choice of words, but they were very adamant about it. This is the central dogma of biology, which is that DNA, that information flows from the DNA out. From the DNA of the creature, information flows out and tells how to make the RNA, and which tells how to put the proteins together, which tells. And it was part of the dogma is that nothing could ever go the other way. There is nothing that a creature could experience or do or think or feel that would go the other way and affect this, this molecular core of itself. And I remember back when I first started really paying attention to how they were laying it out, I was like, well, why is that so important? Why are you emphasizing this part of the dogma that nothing can affect us, or nothing can affect that level of us, right? So it's part of a bigger worldview, which I hope we'll have a chance as a group to talk about later. And for me, there's often these summary statements that any person might make. And Crick said that finally he, a mere mortal, had done away with the need for a god or any intelligence in the universe. And I was just like, whoa, who says that? Who says that kind of stuff? But he said at multiple lectures, and he was, recorded saying it, that he, I guess he didn't say he and his partner, I don't know. And just that level, again, like why would you be so motivated to make statements like that? It's a very telling kind of orientation. And so to get back to the biology of it, it was a statement made in the 50s that information flowed out. So for example, DNA determines the shape of everything about a creature. But no experiment could ever prove that. And but if you open the books, you'll see there are these experiments that prove it, because if you disable the H2D16 gene, then the frog's leg does not grow properly. Or there's these genes that turn on and off in sequence. If you muck up one of the sequences, then the spine doesn't develop properly or something like that. And that is used as proof, that the DNA is causing the shape. And I was always like, this is such sloppy thinking. Really, that's the level of your proof, right? And the example I gave in a lecture recently was, it's kind of like saying, well, I want to do something. I want to build a shed, okay? But then someone comes and mucks with my tools and breaks my saw and throws away my hammer or whatever, and I can no longer build my shed. And then that's used as proof that the hammer and the saw caused the shed to be made. I mean, that's really, in my mind at least, that's the level of these arguments, that if I can muck with some genes and show that an arm forms poorly, and then I claim that the genes cause the arm to form, it's kind of, in my mind at least, it's a similar sort of thinking. I spent several years in the restaurant business, and including cooking. And it's amazing how much of the world you can understand in the restaurant business, right? How much of reality on Earth you can understand. And I'm sure it's true of a lot of different fields, right? But for me, it really, so cooking and recipes, I think, is if you know cooking and you know recipes, I think you can kind of see what the role of the DNA is. I just want to make a little distinction here. So in the vocabulary, the DNA is the full package. It's all the information, most of which we don't understand. But we do know what a very small piece of it does, and we call those the genes. Okay, so genes are not DNA. DNA is this full strand with all the millions of little molecules in them. The genes are those portions of that DNA, very small portion, that code for proteins. And that really is, I've gone over this in my mind for years, it really is the same as an ingredient list. The genes are an ingredient list. They tell you, like if you want to build a pie, that genes tell you, okay, you're going to need to have some butter and some flour. And now let's go make butter, let's go make flour. Okay, that's what all the genes do. This is my understanding now. The genes don't tell you how to make a pie. They don't tell you why to make a pie. But they do allow you to make the ingredients, which is pretty amazing, right? That our body can make almost all of its own ingredients. There's a very few things that we can't make, that our bodies can't make. And we even seem to have that ability as very young children to make literally everything that we need. So I often go back to the cooking analogy when I'm trying to understand how this works. But to get over to Dr. Levin, an amazing lab. You know, pick up some of his papers. You can kind of get a feeling at the level he's working at, he and his people. And he's a master. He's a master at genetics and developmental biology. And he's brilliant in that field. And what he did was he found a way to modify the DNA of these creatures, frogs and worms mostly, modify the DNA so that more ion channels would be produced in a cell. And if you produce more ion channels than are supposed to be there in a cell, then it will change the electrical polarity or the electrical potential. It will change the electrical potential of the cell to something that it is not naturally, something that it shouldn't be, so to speak, right? And when you do that, let me share. Oh, disable. Can you re-enable sharing, please?
Okay, you have it again.
Thanks a lot. Allow. So here's an example of a tadpole, and they go in. So the tadpole comes out of the egg, and at a certain point they go in and they modify the genes. I think it's through the CRISPR technology. I actually forget now how they do it. Probably it's CRISPR, in a certain region to change the number of genes that code for ion channels, excess ion channels in that cell right there. So those group of cells right there, change the electrical potential of the cell, of those cells, to something that they shouldn't be, so to speak. And then voila, an eye grows there. And I have another example of like, or, you know, a leg, other legs grow. Simply by changing the electrical polarity of the cell. Now, in many people's minds, how do I phrase this? Well, I think to me, this really raises the question about the so-called central dogma of biology, because central dogma says that the DNA is isolated from the rest of the world and it just pumps out this information. And here is an experiment from Levin's lab where he's not, all he's really doing is changing the electrical environment that the cells exist in. And then that causes an eye to form. So it really starts to put a crack into the central dogma, right? So how could you explain that with the central? Now I realize it's not cut and dry. You could argue that, well, he's modifying the DNA, right? So that proves that the DNA is responsible. Okay, you know, reasonable objection. But then he went on to look at cancer cells, and he found that he could start and stop cancer cells from growing, again, by changing the electrical potential of the cells. Cancer cells and what are they called? The embryonic stem cells. Stem cells. Cancer cells and stem cells, they have a very different electrical profile than so to speak, differentiated mature cells. And in some respects, they have a less defined electrical potential, less defined differences on the surface of their electrical nature.
Michael,
and,
just so you know, your camera is off.
Darn.
It just happened when you did the screen share.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, and so he is, and then as a cell differentiates into a whatever, from a stem cell into a whatever, its electrical potential goes up, goes away from zero, up or down, depending upon the cell. And so he can he can stop cancer growth or start cancer growth, again, by changing the electrical potential. And that almost, you know, disproves the central dogma right there, because you are eliminating all function of a cell or recreating all function and differentiation of a cell by an external influence, by an external electrical influence. So you are specifically not going in to change the DNA. Now, I do have to say that his research gives me the willies. It makes me just cringe. I could never do research like that. I guess I couldn't be a doctor and work on animals either. But there's something about the type of research he's doing that just seems deeply disturbing to me. He's making monsters, right? He's making monsters and using that to study science. And the justification is that, well, it's all for medicine. That's how you get the funding. That's how you get the funding, is you say we're going to create new medical therapies, and then people who invest in medical technologies give you money. It's kind of that simple. But it's like we need another 10 years of making monsters, or we need another 20 years of making monsters. So that bothers me. And also, I'm very surprised that I read a handful of Levin's papers scattered over about 10 years, and I didn't see once him referencing Robert Becker. I don't know if any of you know Robert Becker. He was a practicing physician in the 70s, the 80s, maybe even to the 90s. And he worked out these principles back then of how external electric fields can affect living creatures. He primarily did it for healing. So Dr. Becker was a burn ward physician, and also worked, I think, with soldiers coming back. And he was exploring all these principles of how electricity could stop healing or encourage healing. So I just find it a little interesting also that Levin maybe doesn't know about Dr. Becker. One thing that is notable, though, Dr. Becker became very vocal at a certain point about his spiritual side. About he was very convinced that we humans are not just sacks of chemicals, that we have a spiritual nature, and this became known, right? This became known, and so I kind of half think that the journals and the education system no longer talks about Becker for that reason, right? Because he doesn't worship at the altar of materialism, and so we can no longer talk about him or something like that. I just want to say a couple more things about Levin's work. The Planarian work is really pretty amazing. Share screen. 2, boom, 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 boom. Planarians are these little worms. You can hold them in your hand. I think they're freshwater. And you can kind of see there's this head, and you can kind of see the two little eyes there. Very cute. And what they did is he like Becker, verified that almost all creatures that I know of have an electrical polarity, and so the head is more positively charged in a Planarian than the back end. There's a gradient. There's an electric field. There's a gradient. There's a change in polarity as you move across the creature. Sorry, potential. And so what you do is you cut off the tail, right? You cut off the tail, and then you do this modification of the cells that I talked about, where you make them more positive by inducing in them the creation of more ion channels of a certain kind. There's different kinds of ion channels. And then voila, a head grows on the tail. Fascinating, terrifying. The creature lives somehow. I can't understand how it lives. And not only that, but it propagates. Planarians propagate asexually. And so now the offspring of this two-headed worm is also a two-headed worm. And again, coming back to the central dogma, we didn't change the DNA, but it sure looks to me like we created a new species. I mean, a two-headed worm, that's, boy, you know, if you stumbled on that in the wild, you would kind of be like, but the DNA is not different, right? It's not that. So somehow the pattern for the worm exists somehow, somewhere, and is being manifested. And then the last thing I'll mention from his work, so again, you cut off the head or tail. I guess in this case, it's just the head. You cut off the head, and the worm grows back a new head. So let's say this guy over here on the left, we cut off his head, and then he just grows back a head. Then he cuts it off again, but they just kind of randomly, as far as I could tell from the paper, they choose a few cells in that cutoff zone to change the way they express themselves electrically. And then you can get different heads to grow from different species. So you can get the species of what this one is, Mediterranea. You can get the Mediterranea head to grow on the Cambridge version. This is the Cambridge, Massachusetts version. You can get a new species head to grow on the other species. And again, this whole question, I mean, one of the main things we refer to as species is all these shapes, right? All the shapes, the different species has a different head, that sort of thing. So we have a new species, so to speak, but we have not done a single thing to change its DNA. Now this really, I think, pushes us up against what is DNA and what is really going on here. And I think we can move now to, the question of where does form come from, or what is form? How does matter organize itself? Unless there's any questions on what came up to here that anybody has, I'd be happy to take a little pause, and if there are any questions about what I presented. Okay, cool.
We'll definitely be sure to have the accompanying videos that you produced in the description box at this point, so anyone can take a segue and probe this further.
Sure, thank you. Yep. So there is this fundamental question then. Can matter organize itself?
Your video is off again. It seems to happen every time you do a screen share.
Okay, sorry about that. Can you still see my worms?
Yes, we can.
Still see the worms.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to switch to another picture soon, so that's fine to have the worms for now. Thank you. So can matter organize itself? For hundreds of years now, we've been trying to say yes to that. We've been trying to say that matter alone can give you everything. And we know this sometimes as the materialist worldview. In the materialist worldview, so me as a physicist, the materialist worldview is that there's matter, and there's forces. And I remember, I don't know, it was at a certain point being like, well, but forces, you know, we can't see them, which is really strange. And yet we're saying that they're material, but they're not. Are they? They're not. So even inherent in the materialist worldview is this fundamental kind of like elephant in the room, that if you only posit matter, you apparently have to also posit these invisible things that can never be seen or felt or sensed, called fields. Okay, well, that's fine. We'll let that go for now. And so sometimes people want to say, well, of course matter organizes itself. Here, I'll prove it to you. And there's these things, they're called these chemical reactions that were discovered a while ago. Let me see if I got a video for that one. Here's my video for that one. Yeah, okay. Go back to the beginning. No, this is fine. This is just, I think it's just two chemicals in a little Petri dish. And if you get the concentrations just right, go ahead, I'll go back a little bit. If you get the concentrations just right, and you get the temperature just right, if you get a lot of things just right, then this incredible reaction happens. And what it is that the chemicals are combining and then dissociating and then recombining and dissociating. And so you get these waves, this wave action, which is pretty fascinating, right? And that's often used as a proof that matter can organize itself. And I mean, the first time I saw this and someone showed it to me, I was like, well, I thought it seems to me you just proved the opposite, because you spent weeks figuring out the exact right combination of chemicals. You spent weeks figuring out the exact temperature and the exact concentrations, and it has to be in a certain size dish, right? So in my mind, you actually prove the opposite, that it takes something else to organize the matter. And once it's set up right, that it'll go that way. I had my personal experience with this was in graduate school, growing crystals. We were studying proteins, and it's very, very difficult to crystallize a protein. Most of the time, it just doesn't work. But if you spend literally weeks and learn how to do it, maybe years, you can get it to happen most of the time. And one of my fellow students was like, see, this is proof that matter can organize itself because the lysozyme forms into a crystal. And I was like, no, I think we just proved the opposite. I think we just proved it takes months of an intelligent creature, you and me, you know, trying to make the matter crystallize, to form itself. So an older body of ideas, let me stop the share and go back. Wait, not that way. An older body of ideas says that this one we'll hopefully come back to later. That so shape, form and shape, where do they come from? One set of ideas says that it comes from the larger world that the thing is a part of. I'll just say that again. That anything's shape, anything's form, comes from the larger world that thing is a part of. So for example, a cell in your liver has a different shape, different form, different function than a cell in your stomach. They only have that different shape and form because they're part of different organs, which is, for a cell, you could say that the organ is a larger world. And then the liver and the stomach only have their shape because they are part of a larger world. And in fact, the whole idea of a proper shape only makes sense if that thing that you're discussing is in a larger world. You can, cancer cells, kind of the perfect example. A cancer cell has broken its connection with the body, with its purpose, with its function. It has no purpose or function anymore in the body, and therefore it loses its right. It has no right form anymore, and it's a terrible thing, right? It's a horrible, terrible thing. it's interesting to notice that the matter does not disconnect. So the tumor is still connected. Blood still flows, nutrients still flow. So the matter has not disconnected. So what has disconnected? And the part I'm trying to argue from is the cell's purpose has disconnected. It's no longer serving the proper function. So function and form go together. Biologists have known this. They're way ahead of the astronomers on this one. Biologists have known this for a long time, what I just said. So what I'm trying to do, as an astronomer, my role as an astronomer is to wake people up to that for the larger worlds, meaning like planets and moons and solar systems. Things only have their shape because they're doing something. A planet, every planet is different in our solar system. And in fact, the particular form of each planet is so different that you need a different theory to explain how each planet has formed. So you need a different theory of planetary formation to describe how the Earth formed, and then you need a different theory of planetary formation to describe how Jupiter formed, right? And but the reason you need those different theories and why it's so cumbersome is because you keep wanting the matter to tell you what's going on. And we have to change our thinking as astronomers, any science really. I'm just taking astronomy as the example. The planets have their form because they're serving a function. That's the only, so to speak, the only reason they have the forms they do. Okay, that's why Jupiter looks different than Uranus. That's why Earth looks so different from Mars. It's because it is serving a different function in the larger body that it's a part of. All the planets we know are part of the body of the sun. The body of the sun is way beyond, we see the little disk. I'm pointing to the left here because my sun is over there. We see the little disk over there. Okay, that's not the body of the sun. That is, if anything, the skeleton of the sun, right? The body of the sun is enormous. It goes way past Pluto. It goes way, 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 way out, the body of the sun. That's the body of the sun. So all the planets just are this tiny little piece of it in the center there. And each of the planets is serving a very particular function for this larger body, and that's why they have the different shapes that they do. Now, electricity, we can use electricity to try to get some insight into this. And I'm going to show these. I'm sure some of you have seen these. This, no, yeah, really incredible work. I forget who did it first. I should find out who did it first. There we go. The Carillion photography. What you do is these are photographs that are usually made by putting something between two electrical plates. You don't have to do it that way. It's just the way that a lot of it's done. And these are an example of that. You put a leaf between two plates. You put a lot of voltage between the plates. You don't need much current. You can have very low current, but like 10,000 volts. And then you put a piece of film in there as well, and then you develop the film, right? And you see these beautiful pictures. I'm sure most of you have seen them, but you can look at these Carillion photographs of different things, and the living ones are always very, so what's happening is that somehow, it's quite complicated, of course, but the electric field is interacting with the leaf, and then the electric field, the leaf changes the flow of the electrons. So electrons are flowing between the two plates. The electrical nature of the leaf changes that flow, and then the electrons hit the film and develop the film. The one on the right is you cut the leaf, you change your film, you change your plates, you wash everything down, you take another picture. Now, I always find these a little hard to believe. The study that this comes from, they looked at 137 different leaves from 14 different species. So 137 leaves. 96 of the trials showed the phantom leaf effect. So on the right here, that top part isn't there anymore. The matter is gone. They cut off the top of the leaf. It's gone, right? And you take the picture again, and you can still see there's something about how the electricity between the two plates is interacting with something. It's being changed by something. So electricity is only affected by electricity, right? A piece of wood doesn't feel a magnet because a piece of wood doesn't have magnetism. And so there's something comparable here. Whatever is still there has an electrical nature. Otherwise, the electrons flowing between the plates wouldn't be affected by it. It's just amazing. I can never look at these enough. And this to me, it kind of raises the question, or has that same idea as the hologram. So holograms are amazing, and they, I can never get over how strange they are. And I don't need to go into the full details of how you make them. Making them is actually not so hard. You shine lasers and you have film and you have another source of light and then you reconstruct it. But the point is that every little piece of the hologram, so hologram is a developed something. It's like a film, but it's not a film. It's a developing process. But every little piece of it, here's my full hologram. I take a little piece of the hologram. That little piece contains the entire picture. The entire picture can be reconstructed from every little piece of the hologram film. So that to me is magic. And I've gone through the explanation any number of times myself. I always go, oh yes, I understand, yes, yes, yes. And then I'm still like, no, this is magic. This doesn't make any sense. But it's highlighting something fundamental in the world, that there is this property that nature has that is highlighted through the hologram process, where every piece of something contains the whole thing. Magical, it's a very strange principle, but you can see it. You can, and so there's something about the leaf example to me that has that same resonance, that every piece of the leaf contains the whole leaf. So you can cut off a piece of the leaf and somehow the whole leaf is still there. The Planarian worm, you can cut off its head, but somehow the head is still there. Right? And then the matter fills it in. The matter fills in whatever's there already. I know I keep talking about life and living systems, so let me talk a little bit about non-living systems. Snowflake being one of my favorite examples. No, not that. Yes, that. Again, the snowflake often touted as a proof that matter can organize itself. And to me, I was always like, no, you're missing the point. And so to highlight, there's different aspects we're going to look at it, but the one to me that screams out the loudest is, if you really think the matter is organizing itself, and you really think there's just atoms of water that are somehow, doing this on their own, let's look at, let's highlight some sections. So here's one piece of the snowflake, in red, and here's its comparable neighbor over there, and they have the same form, right? Same shape, same form. And you can choose that. You can choose any two parts, and they have the same shape, the same form. And it's kind of, the more you look, it's kind of amazing, right? How does it? And now you got to think about the distances involved. If you believe that atoms, matter, is doing all this, how far is it? If you're an atom over here, how far is it to over here? Well, I don't know the exact number, but there might be 10 trillion water molecules between these two. So just think about any other thing you know about in the world, right? I was just thinking about people. There's not 10 trillion people, but say you had a group of people here, and you wanted a group of people far away to do the same thing, right? Well, 10 trillion people away, that's inconceivably far away. So there is no mechanism. There's no known mechanism. There's no known communication system in the materialist worldview that would allow this part of the snowflake to know what this part of the snowflake is doing, right? I keep going back to this, and before giving this talk the first time, this data the first time, I looked at the literature again, and I saw a few papers published that said, you know, the six-fold nature of snowflakes has finally been explained. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can't use this example anymore. All right, I'll read the papers. And I read the papers, and all they did was they grew some pattern in a computer. You know, they did one of these computer, what are they called, cellular automata or diffusion limited aggregation. They did some computer process to make a shape. Random computer process to make some shape. And then they imposed a six-fold symmetry on it. And then they wrote the paper up, and they somehow put in the title, you know, six-fold nature of snowflakes has been explained. And I was just like, oh boy, just the level of, you know, absurdity in the scientific world. Anyway, so it's a mystery, and I'm not claiming to understand how it works. I'm just using this as an example of why materialism doesn't work, you know, why it's completely broken. So I know I haven't said what form is, right? I understand that. And there's a certain argument like, well, you know, you can't talk about it until you can tell me what it is. But in my mind, you can't tell me what matter is either. So I don't know why matter wins. Like, why can you just assume matter? I'm not really quite sure about that one. I'm trying to so I'm sure most of you on the call know that, you know, older traditions, they don't really talk about one thing that's relevant for creation. And nor do they talk about two things, right? It's like I said, the materialist worldview says you just have matter, just matter and forces, right? Or matter and fields. So that's maybe two things. You could say that we have two things that cause all creation. But to me, any system that has a real explanatory power always includes three principles. And I have a very strong connection with my religion, and I've studied other religions, and they're all talking about three principles of creation. And even the ones that try to be, you know, there's some that try to, if you read like a pamphlet or something about some of these things, like maybe Taoism or Zoroastrian, they try to say it's two forces, you know, two forces in the universe. But if you study these religions, no, or these deep philosophical systems, there's three. There is three. It may not sound that way. So what could the three principles of creation be? You know, going forward, we all know that ideas have a lifetime. Ideas are born, they live, and then somehow their usefulness ends. And so I might go back to you know, the 1st or 2nd century AD in Europe, and find that there's a lot of discussion about the Trinity and the creative power of a Trinity. And there's different ways it's described: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or the words are hard to translate, but I used to know the Greek words for these. But the most brilliant, the most powerful is one principle: absolute matter, not dead matter, but completely dark, firm matter is the other principle. And then the third principle is it's a word for time that we no longer really have. It's not eternity, it's a different word. It's kairos. But the idea being that there's always three principles that create anything. So what I'm proposing, I guess, in this talk, and I is that if we're going to move forward, science is stuck. A lot of us know that. Or what did you say, Matt? You said something about ideas that no longer work, but we keep using them anyway. Something like that. I forget how you said it, but it was really well said as you introduced me. So all of our physics and chemistry, it's all broken because we're not. So one way forward would be to start talking about three principles again, and find a way, a language, a form, a way to use that makes sense to us now. I know some of us can talk about Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and it still conveys meaning. But for most people, that's lost its meaning. That way of talking about it is done. this is me proposing, right? We can certainly love to talk about it with you all, but as meaningful as it is for me still personally, I still feel the need in the way forward. There has to be a new way to talk about this. I don't know how we come up with it, whether it's revelation or I don't know, but we need it, right? So sorry, I'm kind of talking around in this. So matter is still a principle. You need it to make anything. In order to make dinner, you need the ingredients, okay? Form could be seen as a principle on its own. We don't need to explain where form comes from any more than we need to explain where matter comes from. It could be seen as a principle that manifests differently in different parts of creation, but it's still a principle in and of itself. And then a third principle, I wonder about this a lot and ponder the different influences I've been lucky enough to been under. And the one thing that jumps out to me as a possible third is whatever it is that we call life. We have a word for it, life. Believe it or not, if you are raised as a biologist or a physicist like I was, you are taught that life does not exist. That may sound completely absurd, but it's absolutely true. You're taught that life is an illusion, that it's all just chemistry, right? Like the Crick, the Watson and Crick idea. It's just chemicals, right? There is no, and I mean, talk about absurd, right? I mean, if you put a dead squirrel and a live squirrel in front of you, you can tell which is which, right? You don't need, it's just obvious. There's this other thing. So that's one way maybe to look at this going forward, how I'm working with it. This is part of what I'm trying to work with, how to bring this into the world. And maybe looking at matter as a principle, shape or form or function as a principle, and then a third principle that is equally mysterious, and we don't know where it comes from. We don't know how to create it. We don't know how to destroy it. We don't know where it comes from. This thing that one could call life, maybe spiritualization. I'm not sure. This is part of what one wrestles with. So I thought maybe that might be an okay place for me to end. And I would love to hear some of your thoughts, you all, on what I just said about a path forward out of the broken systems that we are currently studying in universities, right? These systems that are broken and will not lead us forward. So there, I'll stop for now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clarage, for just getting the engine started on some very big ideas that I think people definitely need to really work through and chew on, since there's a deficit in a certain set of qualitative ideas in our society, which I think the absence of these ideas and this way of thinking is in large measure not the only reason, but I think a driving reason why our society is beset by so many interconnected crises. So it's really great that you're sort of creating an environment, a psycho-spiritual, intellectual environment for these ideas to find fertile soil. Already there's a few questions. I have a few, but I'll hold back for my questions for now. John was the first to pop in. Actually, Magdalena was the first to pop in earlier on regarding amputation. Magdalena, would you like to pose your thought as a question?
Yes, I was when you were talking about the electric resonance, I guess what you call, or when you cut the leaf off and you still see the shape. It reminded me kind of when you heard about soldiers who had amputated legs and that they had phantom pain in their amputated legs. And I was wondering if that was related, if that has to do with electricity. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that is. I looked at that recently also to see if there was new medical or experiments around that. And I found a couple of papers that definitely hinted, or not hinted isn't the right word, they found some evidence that there is something there where the limb used to be. And by something, I mean something that you can measure with, that a physicist can measure with his instruments, right? And I think they were doing magnetic field. I think they found a way. The one group I studied, they were using a magnetometer, just a device that measures magnetic fields, and they were putting it all, taking data, and they could kind of make it. It was a very, very low resolution. That was part of the problem. Very low resolution image of the body, and then it came to the arm, which was amputated here, and they could still see that the magnetometer was picking up something. But again, it was such low resolution that I didn't feel like I could use it directly. So I think that certainly is evidence of it still there. What you're asking, but what you brought in is this thing about, okay, I would propose part of what you're bringing in is the question of consciousness. Now, I know that's a very difficult word, right? We could talk all day about what that word means. So I'm not going to get too, but the poor person is aware. They're conscious. They are aware of something. Now, the materialist medical establishment, they call it, what do they call it? Phantom. Anyway, they're trying to say it's not real, right? Now, whatever that means, right? Oh, it's all in your head. But I'm kind of like, well, isn't all pain in your head, right? So, I mean, it's really a shoddy argument, but there is some connection there with awareness or consciousness that is still, it's still there. It's still out there somehow, right? And I don't know what experiments one would do, but I would love to meet someone who could think of some experiments that would pursue that question. What's its connection to consciousness? We're so, understandably so, we are all our consciousness is very attached to our physical bodies, right? Or at least our ordinary consciousness, I'll say. And so there's something about it, right? That somehow our sense of ourselves inhabits these bodies, and it still inhabits it even when you cut off the arm. It somehow still inhabits where the arm used to be. Some of my thoughts.
John?
Sorry, I want to
follow-up question. Yeah,
follow
sure,
up on this because I'm curious. Do you think it could have something to do with your brain remembering your limbs that have been there before?
I'm considering that. Yeah, I don't know. To me, it doesn't work because no one understands memory yet, and so it's kind of a mystery being explained by a mystery. But it's an interesting. I guess maybe I would see it, or where I would first go with it is that our awareness of our bodies has an enormous electrical component or electromagnetic component. That somehow our awareness, our sense of ourselves has a very big electromagnetic component to it, not just chemical, and so since the phantom limb still exists in some way electromagnetically, that's why the awareness or consciousness can still inhabit it, because there is still some electromagnetic arm still there.
I noticed that there was there's a couple of questions. Satomi had a question on memory as well, and so did Stephen. Stephen actually brought up the question of the analogy between water having memory and what you're dealing with here with what you've been discussing on limb amputation. I have a thought to contribute to that as well, but I don't know if that directly sparks anything for you.
The water memory?
Yeah.
No, I mean, with the phantom limb thing, no, it doesn't right now, but it's a really good connection. But no, I don't have any particular, right now, further thoughts on that. Yeah.
Have you, we'll get back into the sequencing of questions in a second, I promise. Have you seen the work that Luc Montagnier had done on water memory?
Yes, I read those papers a year or so ago. Oh my God. Like, I don't know why every single textbook has not been rewritten, right? That's a perfect example. So why don't you say why don't you just briefly explain what you're referencing there?
Sure. Yeah. So for those who don't know, basically, Dr. Montagne, who had won the Nobel Prize for his work on HIV back in the early 80s, but he basically broke into a different field of research that was connected, surprisingly, to his work on virology. But he was looking into the matter of what allows DNA to form and what are the electromagnetic conditions that shape the construction of DNA. And what he did is he took some DNA. I don't know exactly what type, and he put them in a liquid solution and then filtered it out like 18 times, like just filtered the solution so that there's no evidence of any material particles left. And if memory serves me, what he did with these filtered solutions was that he put it into an environment which was being shaped by a 7.8 hertz background field, which is sort of what mimics the Schumann resonance. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't work if you don't have this background field in the laboratory in question. And what then he did is he took a bunch of nucleotides, just like particles, proteins, and put them into that solution, right? There's no DNA formation at all. They're just loose now in it. And what had happened is that there was a recombination of when the field was set up, there was a recombination of these nucleotides in the form of a clone of the original DNA that was originally in the solution before it was filtered. So, but an almost perfect clone of the DNA, indicating that there was some memory embedded in the structure of the water molecules themselves that were holding that information, that blueprint that organized their reconstruction. And I'm oversimplifying it. I think I've gotten some things wrong about it, but that's essentially what the outcome was.
Right. So that was definitely that was the first round of experiments. And then the really over the top part, the second round of experiments. I didn't used to like him, because I thought he really, anyway, but after this, I'm like now an entirely new respect for this guy, the brilliance, right? So the second round of experiments is what Matt just described. What Matt just described is here over on vial A, okay? So you had some DNA in there to begin with, and you let it sit in the water, and then as Matt said, you filter it all out, so now you just have the water. Okay, this was all taking place in the circumstances that Matt described. And I'm a little bit foggy on this part, but what he does is he sets up an antenna. So this is a radio antenna he sets up that listens to the first one. It's just sitting there. It's just an antenna. It's not doing anything. It's just listening. And then he has a radio frequency receiver and amplifier, and he sends it, I think it was across town. I mean, he sends it far away. He sent the signal far away.
From France to Italy, from laboratory.
Something crazy like that, right? So here we are in Italy, and he has a second thing of water, and then over here, the antenna then transmits. So here, the information is going this way, so to speak. It's a passive receive. You receive the information, but then on the other side, you're broadcasting the information. So you're just broadcasting, and he's trying to not do anything, he's trying to just take whatever he gets, put it through his amplifier, send it to Italy, and then broadcast it out the second antenna. And it recreated, and then like Matt said, you throw a bunch of guanine and what are the GCTAs, all the pieces of the DNA, whatever those are called. You just throw them in bucket B, and then bucket B recreates the original DNA that was in bucket A. Just incredible, right? Completely incredible. And why hasn't every textbook been rewritten because of this, right? It's just, yeah, astounding. Truly astounding.
It definitely reintroduces the idea. It is very synergistic with what you were saying regarding the seeming, the amputation phenomenon, the cut leaf process, the Carillion photography. We're seeing evidence of memory, and people think of, I think, memory as a function of mind, and that would be, it's too troubling for a lot of people to go there, to think that mind exists in nature outside of human beings. And that's a scary thing for a lot of people who are a bit too comfortable in their ivory
And this is
tower.
a good example that the electromagnetic world, whatever that mysterious world is where electromagnetic fields exist, it can transmit the form. So I'm not saying that the electromagnetic field creates the form. I don't know about that, but this evidence does show that it can transmit, it can somehow hold and transmit the form. And there's a really close connection between the world of magnetism and this whole question of form, shape. They're really tightly connected somehow.
And on this, John has a question on Rupert Sheldrake, which I'm imagining was going to play in very well into this conversation. John.
Well, before I ask about Sheldrake's morphic resonance, I think I'm fascinated by your idea of the Trinity. Because quite often in these systems where there's three, the third one sort of plays a role of life. So if you look at dialectics, you've got the transformation of quantity into quality, the negation of the negation. But the third one is the interpenetration of the opposites. And the interpenetration of the opposites, that's in fact some kind of life-giving force, and that allows the whole system to advance forward. So it's, of course, in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, or the Holy Spirit, it's the Holy Spirit that somehow gives life to the mystical system. Listening to your proposed Trinity is matter, form, and life. And
that is certainly one. Yeah, I mean, I am very open to some other ways to put it, but
so. But that 40 years ago, Rupert Sheldrake proposed something he called morphic resonance. And the idea that some form possibly gets created for the first, or rises for the first time somewhere in the universe. And from the very fact that it exists, that form can then be carried to other parts of the universe. And this manifests itself in the way that it seems that the more often an experiment is conducted, the more likely it is to be conducted successfully in other places, and so on and so forth. Is that consistent with your intuition?
it definitely is. And I think part of that picture is that the first experiment, or the first time, takes an enormous amount of effort. To create the first version of something, anything, right? And then what you said, right? Then it gets easier and easier and easier. And I just loved his example of, I mean, when I saw him, what he was talking about, he had collected some example from the chemical industry, where he found, like, whatever it was, 6 or 10 different chemical molecules that didn't exist before, 1952, and then somebody finally invents this certain chemical molecule, whatever it is, and it's through great effort and great expense, and then it gets easier and easier to make the molecule as time goes by, and even the physical chemical properties of the molecule change. So the melting point of this new molecule is something like 82 degrees Celsius when it's first created for the first several years, and then over time the melting point of that molecule changes and goes down, like, by 10 degrees or something crazy like that. Right?
I've forgotten that detail, yes.
And so it does fit the idea that, like I was saying, that somehow form is held by or communicated by this world that we call electromagnetism. And one of the things we know about the world of electromagnetism is it seems to have the usual rules of space don't apply so well. So it's almost impossible to isolate antennas from each other. Once you put out a signal in the electromagnetic spectrum, it goes everywhere. And you have to do an incredible amount of effort to try to block it or contain it. Right, so that's one of the properties. It just goes everywhere. You make a radio signal over here, it goes everywhere, and it can be picked up everywhere. And I'm just coming back to what you're saying about morphic resonance and this field, whatever this field is. I think he even calls it a morphic field. Once the form is created for the first time at great effort, and I would say through great mind, through great application of mind, then that signal it goes out. It goes out everywhere. That signal goes out everywhere, and it exists everywhere in this electromagnetic field. Whether it lasts or not, of course, is a question. There's plenty of quick pulses that come and go, but if you can keep making that form, keep making that molecule over and over and over and over again, then it can become a something that exists in time, whatever we call time.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Luc, I know you've been waiting.
Yes. Okay, so my question is fairly simple, I guess. Are you familiar with Georges Lakhovsky, author of The Secret of Life?
I am not.
Because it kind of reminds me when you were talking about the experiment with one of the doctors, what was it? Looking at my notes. Robert Becker, with the use of external electrical influence. But basically, with a book like The Secret of Life, his secret is basically that all the cells are essentially both receptors and transmitters of frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
And then like that's what I was going to ask at first, and then I heard you ask your question to us about what is life.
Mm.
And then when it reminded me of this book, The Secret of Life. But then all these frequencies that, and then when you're mentioning the Luc Montagne example, they're actually transmitting sound, and that's like a waveform. And in the word form, waveform, there's like a form in there. So it's interesting to me that the form is contained maybe in this pulse or this frequency, and that in The Secret of Life example, there's actually a way to treat cancer patients or any kind of sickness, because you are stimulating the cells to such a frequency that they will resonate, or they will go back to their resonance. So what is life? I guess I had my answer about the initial part. I mean, you had not been aware of Georges Lakhovsky.
Yeah.
So I guess that's all I really wanted to say at this point.
You know, the statement, the idea about that every cell is both a transmitter and a receiver. I think that's a good lens to look at this whole question of like why it doesn't work to say that DNA causes everything, because that is a one-way paradigm. Built into the central dogma is that information only goes out, right? And so coming back to that and what you just said reminded, that can't be true. because nothing works that way. There is nothing that works that way, except maybe some political parties. But it's it has to go both ways. The information has to go both ways. So every cell has to be both transmitting its message. I am a liver cell, right? It transmits that, and it transmits it chemically. It transmits it electromagnetically. It transmits it, I don't know, all the different ways, right? And then it also, we have to include in whatever, that it's also receiving. It has to be receiving somehow a message that corresponds to that, or I'm not even, my words are kind of falling apart here. But there is no such thing as a liver cell that's not in a liver, I guess might be one way to say it, right? That it has to go both ways. It has to go both ways.
But what would be the message that they would receive?
I know, that's a great question. I was just kind of, yeah. And if we take it to ourselves, if we bring it to our own personal selves, we kind of know that each of us is broadcasting ourselves. We broadcast ourselves constantly, right? And then what is right? And then that, just to your question, then. So then, but what is the message we are receiving? What message are we receiving? Yeah, it's a great question.
I forgot to mention one part. Sorry
Sure.
if I go. In the answer of what is life, I thought of Lyndon LaRouche, who talks about creativity as being essentially the principle of anti-entropy.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I like that.
has
That's a
to
good way
be
to
part
put
of
it. Yeah, it's another example of how our current science paradigm is broken. We have this thing called the second law of thermodynamics. We even called it a law. I mean, right, which says that things only go one way. Entropy only increases, right? And all of us know it's not. A lot of us know that's not true because we live in the world and we see it going both ways. We see things being created, in which case the entropy goes down so much, and then we see things being destroyed, in which case the entropy goes back up, and we see it's always flowing both ways. And then what you said about the creativity, yeah, that's an enormous lowering of entropy. If I create a new, I don't know, just a new anything, yeah, a new song, right? So there's all the millions, uncountable number of ways I can put together the notes. Yeah, create a new song. It's out there. Entropy has just been lowered tremendously.
Well, if you think of like the cell, the multiplication of the cells is a creative principle in action. There's actually a growth happening.
Okay.
And that's the sense or the way I was thinking about when I use the term creativity. I'm thinking of like life creating growth.
I get you.
So the cell starts off being inseminated, right? There's the action of the exterior on an initial something, and then once it's inseminated or whatever, it starts dividing, which paradoxically is multiplying itself.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating.
It is, right. And if you imagine all the substance around the new creature, so all the air and the water and the nutrients, all somehow around the new creature, as it divides, as you're saying, as that zygote divides and divides and divides and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the cells get more and more specific, and they get more and more specific and more. That's entropy going down, 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 down enormously. And you can imagine all that stuff around the creature all coming into that creature and having its entropy lowered enormously as that creature grows. There's I remember having some of these arguments a while ago about, someone said, well, but the second law of thermodynamics still holds because as the new baby is growing, we were talking about plants, I think, as the new plant is growing, yes, the entropy decreases enormously, for all those molecules, but it must be increasing somewhere else. It's just like, how would you measure that, right? Prove it. Do an experiment. Show me the entropy increasing somewhere else when a new plant grows, right? I mean, what are you talking about? That conversation didn't go any further.
Yeah, it's funny. We can't even like define simple terms like what is even life, and yet we can make these broad general statements about the nature of the entire universe.
Yeah.
And when it started, when it's going to end, and what its characteristics are. Yeah.
We can even tell people exactly how many protons there are in the entire universe.
Oh yeah, that's been calculated, right? Of course.
Yes, of course.
And just like how much dark matter there is. So let's Grant, I know you've been waiting for a while. You got a multiply connected question here. Go for it. Grant, can you take yourself off mute? Let's see. Are you there? Did we lose Grant?
You see something, but we still don't hear you. No, still don't hear you.
I think we lost Grant. It wasn't a bad question. He had asked here. Yeah, definitely not here. Okay, so his first question was more practical. Curious whether the cut leaf was photographed on a different plate or the same one. If the same one, could there have been some sort of electrical residue left up that was being picked up? That's his first practical little question.
Right. Yeah. So I think I raced over that. I did say it, but I was talking fast at the time. Yes, you changed the plate. So they were very clear about that in their experiments, that you had to change new plates, new film, everything for exactly that reason. Yeah.
And his second part question is a little bit more broad, but he noted that your idea of forms sounds a lot like Plato's concept of universal pre-existing forms to me. Would I be hearing that correctly?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. In one sense, Socrates and Plato worked this all out, through 2,800 years ago, right? So I'm not claiming that any of this is new. I don't think there's anything new. But I am advocating for how do we frame it for our age? How do we frame it for a way that conducts meaning for us? Because if the ideas of Socrates and Plato, if they still conducted meaning sufficiently, we wouldn't need new, But that's just not the way humanity seems to work, right? Ideas get old. So yeah, definitely, it could be the world of forms. I don't know if Plato, maybe someone else, anybody else, please chime in. I don't remember Socrates and Plato talking about the form as, do they talk about it as actively creative? Like, is it an active something that actually, plunges into matter and organizes it? I don't remember if they talk about it that way.
I think that the first formulation that I know of the Trinity concept was outlined in Plato's Timaeus dialogue, where the idea of this creative force of the creator and creation, the effect, were investigated in a variety of angles and ways. Where I don't know if he ever formalized, in my experience, and somebody else could jump in, who knows? Maybe actually Quan is the next person on the list, and I think Quan is very well positioned to chime in. Did he ever make that explicit?
Yes, I think we can consider that he made it explicit, because for him, the phenomena of the natural world are simple copies of the eternal forms. And so if they are simple copies, it means that the eternal forms intervene in the fabrication of the natural phenomena.
But do new eternal forms get created?
What's that, John?
Excuse me?
Do new eternal forms get created?
Oh.
Yes, but I would like to make a link between Plato, what Dr. Clarage is saying, and the Adi Atma Vidya, because as you said, Dr. Clarage, I suppose you're not unfamiliar with the notions of prana, bindu, or murti.
No, I don't know that I am.
Okay, because I would be the idea of intentional organization being anti-anthropic precisely against the idea of blind organization or bottom up. I would say that everything we discuss here is in a top bottom pattern, and the Trinity that you brought forth during your excellent lecture, and thanks for that, life, forms, and matter, in the Indian tradition is called Bindu, Prana, and Mukti. And when we were discussing of the fact that many people are uncomfortable with the fact that mind exists somewhere in the universe outside body incarnation, precisely for that corpus of thinking, even thoughts are the most subtle manifestation of the level called matter. And the level of prana, which is energy, correspond, according to my understanding, what you call forms, or Plato called eidos. And bindu precisely is, okay, or the personal particle of life that is at the root of each person, because life in the cosmic sense is much greater than that. There's a background noise from someone. The other thing, anyway, I would like to suggest, if in case you don't know the Lankavatara Sutra, I think that you would be quite excited by this sutra, because it goes quite in the direction of your work, and it gives many details that, in my opinion, could be the root of many interesting and practical experiences.
Could you put that in the chat?
Absolutely. The name of the Lankavatara Sutra, I will write it now. Sorry, I'm a little slow for writing. And
okay.
Okay, so Lankavatara Sutra. I'm quite sure you will be quite excited by that in terms of conceptually speaking. And you can read maybe a guy called Kalu Rinpoche, which is a Buddhist monk from the Tibetan tradition, but would go quite deep in those things. And I'm absolutely okay. I think that you received the two words, Lankavatara Sutra and Kalu Rinpoche, because I'm in favor.
Yeah, I don't see it in chat.
Yeah,
okay.
we got those names. Thank you so much,
okay,
Juan, for putting giving those leads.
Okay.
Michael, did you?
Because
Sorry, yeah, Juan, finish.
oh, sorry, go.
No, if you were finished your thought, I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
Oh, okay. So in the Lankavatara Sutra, maybe Matthew, you can send it to him. For unknown reason, he did not receive it.
Oh, because you sent it to me as a direct message. I'll make them public.
Okay.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
I'll make them public. It's fine.
When I said I'm quite clumsy with those machines.
Yeah.
I'm too clumsy in the world of matter.
Exactly, you're too clumsy in the world of matter. There we go. Now I see it.
Okay, so so Lankavatara Sutra is the text from the Buddhist tradition that goes into quite deep detail, according to me, and going into the same big concept of top-down organization or intentional organization. All right, going in the same direction than the anti-anthropic thing by LaRouche and so on by Plato, and rather than the blind organization thing starting maybe from the end of the 19th century, which in my mind also is a bad direction, even if it gave some results on the practical level, I cannot deny it. But I think that it's a dead end, that we have to go back to the intentional organization general concept to go further in the exploration of inner outer reality. And I think that you will be quite excited by the own understanding by the Adhyatma Vidya or by Taoism, but I restrict myself to the Adhyatma Vidya or the Sutra things because since it's in Sanskrit, it's closer to the Westerners. Of course, you know the expression. Om. Of course, Om. A is for matter, U is for forms, and M is for life. Okay, so if you read the Adhyatma Vidya, not only for Kalu Rinpoche, but from a lot of evolved masters, I am quite sure that you will be quite excited because you will find new development for your own concepts, and maybe more importantly, ideas for practical experiences, to experiments, to stress the reality of those concepts.
Right. Yeah, cool. Thank you. Yeah.
But I have a question. Will take two seconds. In terms of Carillion photography, I suppose you're aware of the fact that the Russian, I think in the 60s, managed to prove that 6 months before the death of someone, the aura of energy around him disappear. I think you're aware of it.
No, I didn't. I never saw that. Wow.
Okay. Probably that's the strongest proof by Carillion photography that there is an energy body animating the matter body, if I may say so. The prana aspect.
Yeah, sorry, I just have to check. I'm going to Google this and try to look into this. Quan, if you have a link that you think is useful on that, I'd like to see that personally. It sounds kind of fatalistic in some ways, because I'm sure it doesn't apply to everybody who may or may not die in 6 months, but I'd like to know how they approach that.
6 months before they die.
Well, that's the yeah, maybe. I'd have to. Wow. I need to research this. I need to know more.
That's a possibility of exploration. That's why I'm talking about
definitely
that.
Open possibility for sure.
The Russians are pretty far ahead of us on a lot of these questions. With the work I do with the Sapphire Group, the Russians stumbled on a lot of this. Stumble isn't the right word. The Russians were experimenting and publishing a lot of the same stuff. And as I have one Russian contact scientifically, he said, well, yes, the Americans, they like their models. The Russians, we like the data. So the Americans, we won't study this stuff because we don't have a model for it. So we won't even look at it because we're like, well, how can it be true? It can't be true, right? And the Russians are like, well, I don't know. I don't care about your model. Here's the data, right? The Carillion photography data shows that the field goes away 6 months before it dies, right?
Yeah, they don't have the problem of letting their theories get away with experimental data.
Yeah.
We have here. Sorry, Monty had a thought. Monty, did you want to share your question, thought, or pass?
Well, I was just reminded, a little segue into this. I was watching a presentation by Dr. Charles Morgan to West Point, which was presented in 2018. I was rather surprised to see it. I caught it on Rumble. And his title of his presentation was Psycho-Neural Biology War. And it was rather astonishing presentation. My comment when I posted it was that truth is stranger than fiction. And essentially it was talking about the means by which through DARPA, I mean, they're already in play with this insofar as manipulating genes to the extent that they're able to change the ability of what we see, to remotely view things, And everything with DARPA, I think, or everything imitation by man in which they attempt to increase their power over humankind is rather a mimic. And in line with that, my comment was, this presentation reminds me again of Vladimir Vernadsky on his experiments and proof of the noosphere. And so there does seem, which this attempt through AI to upload into the cloud and everything, I think just mimics something that we already have the capacity to do, but it's been very restricted through various attacks on our ability as human beings to really communicate, to be in touch with the universe as a principle, attacks on our pineal gland, our chemistry, and so forth. But I guess my question goes to this thing. There seems to be something of a congruence between this idea of the noosphere, Christ consciousness, simultaneity of eternity. In other words, our ability that we've had hints of, and I think we have a suspicion of, or proof for, but I think this great awakening is somewhat awakening to that fact. And going back to Vladimir Vernadsky once again, I think he did experiments along the lines through various means by demonstrating this. So would you have any comment on that?
Well, it does, one part of what you said, this, I remember it was, I met someone whose grandmother, her husband was a sailor who was in Massachusetts here. And somehow the discussion came to cell phones and, or no, just telephones. I don't know if there were cell phones much at the time. This was a while ago. And I said something like, or one of us said something like, yeah, what did people do before there were phones, right? How would sailors, how difficult that must have been to not know if your husband was coming back or whatever. And the grandmother said something like, you idiots, or something like that. You knew if you were a wife, you knew if your husband was coming back. You just knew it. You didn't need a phone. And so that example, from what pertaining to what you just said, that a lot of this might be, or probably is, abilities that we've had. We had them before, or maybe they come and go through history. Who knows? But a cell phone just mimics an ability that we have, which is to be in contact with those that we love or that we're connected to, right? And it seems like this miracle. It is kind of a miracle, but anyway, it seems like this miracle that only happened with the advent of technology, but the technology might just be mimicking something that is already inherent in us. Whether or not we use it, that's a whole other question, right? How does it get atrophy? Is a great word. It gets atrophied. Why is it being atrophied? Like this thing about being able to see magnetic fields. I know when I was young, that was a joke, right? You can't. And then somebody discovered that the pigeons have magnetic sensors in their eyes, right? It's a variation of the what is it? One of the chromophores, one of the molecules in the retina that picks up on light. If you vary it, there's a variation on it where then it can also activate through magnetic field. And so this was a while, I don't know, 10 years ago or something. And then, so that kind of, opened up that whole field of creatures being able to see magnetic fields. And then it was not too long ago, somebody found in human DNA, found the gene. Remember how I said genes are just recipes for proteins, they're just a small section of the DNA. Someone found in human DNA the same protein that the pigeons use in their retinas to see magnetic fields, meaning that it's inherent in us, that we have in our lying dormant in us, we have the possibility to see magnetic fields, to actually see them, right? And I was thinking about when I was finding that paper about the DNA, the human DNA, at the time I was also preparing to talk about Jupiter, magnetic fields of Jupiter and Saturn and the connection with their moons, and how the magnetic body of Jupiter is like, it's as big as your hand. If you hold your hand outstretched at arm length, that gives you a feeling for how big the magnetic body of Jupiter is. When we look at Jupiter now with our eyes, we just see a little dot. It's not a star, but it's, you know, it's a little, right? But can you imagine if you could see the magnetic body of Jupiter, how differently you would, what a different experience you would have of Jupiter and Saturn and all these things moving around the star, you know? And so to think that our ancestors might have seen a very different world than we see is a very real, I mean, I think a lot of us always kind of know that it's quite possible that our ancestors actually saw and heard a different world than we do. But when I saw that story about the pigeon chromophore being a magnetophore, and that the human DNA still has the protein in there, the code for it, but for some reason we either don't express it or we're not trained to use it, it all kind of came around full circle for me. And I was like, you know what? We may, you know, we may have seen a very different world several thousand years ago than we see now. Sorry, that was kind of I don't know if I don't know if I answered. Anyway, that's my response to what you said.
Well, that's one of the beauties of this type of conversation is it's all connected. So you can't really go off topic so much. It's impossible.
My get out of jail free card. Oh, it's one of Matt's classes. I can talk about anything.
The thought as well on Vernadsky, for those who don't know, I'll put a little link to an introduction to Vernadsky's work, but it's really brilliant stuff. And we were, you know, talking about just this genius in the Russian culture. And he was a former head of the Russian Academy of Sciences in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and had made incredible breakthroughs in so many fields. And he created a field called biogeochemistry. And there was a big fight over who would define the new term of noosphere that had just come about in the early 20th century, of this looking at the world from the standpoint that you have the lithosphere, you know, the atoms that are not being animated by life, the biosphere where atoms might, you know, they just behave totally differently. They have different cycles, different purposes. And then you have the higher, newer emergent domain of the noosphere of human cognitive thought. And there was a big fight over what that would be defined by. And it's really refreshing stuff to look at Vernadsky's approach versus some of the other views that were coming about throughout the 20th century, which unfortunately some very nasty people today are really big fans of the idea of uploading the entire noetic force into clouds, digitizing everything, and it gets kind of creepy and crazy. But there's a lot of really perverse ideas of what the mind is and how it expresses itself in nature. But I'll put a little link, like I said, in the chat box for people to dig into some of Vernadsky's works if they want to on their own.
Cool.
There's a question by Irina she's been waiting for a while. Irina, go for it.
Hi there.
Hey.
Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. Well, to that idea about cell phones, where I live here on Orcas Island, there used to be a guy who lived here. I wish I could remember his last name. His first name was Craig, and he had a second home here. And, you know, we're near Seattle, big tech city. He was considered to be the father of cell phones. And in conversations here, just, you know, in the neighborhood, he made the comment that in the future we would all be able to communicate, you know, without the cell phone. And someone specifically asked, you know, does that mean we'll have chips in our heads? And he said no. So
good.
he was sort of on to something else, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm also intrigued by the third principle, and I wish you would clarify or give more examples of the Trinity because life, matter, and form, I don't quite see how that correlates to, say, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, or any other Trinity. I would, maybe not in this conversation necessarily, but in the notes, I would be really interested to know more examples of that. And in your particular example, the life, the form, and the matter, do you consider the life to be the Holy Ghost?
Great question. I know, right? Yeah, this is I guess if I had to put the two maps together, then no, I would say that the form is the Holy Ghost. If I had to put them together, partly because in the Christian map, that principle, the Holy Ghost principle, is completely mysterious. It is just, you can't pin it down, you can't see it, you can't make it happen. You can't control it, and it has that kind of like, it comes, it goes, where does it come from? So that's kind of why I would say it's that way with form for me. Somehow it resonates. Somehow I'm just saying that for me, the resonance is with this idea of form. Form is a complete mystery. I don't even know how matter retains its form. I'm looking at all the things in my room right now, and every single thing in my room has a specific form, and somehow it keeps its form. Just like, I don't know how any of that works. It's complete magic, right? Whereas the life principle would be more the Father, the source, the highest, the thing that sets everything in motion, and then the matter part.
Be also the logos, right?
For which one?
For life. I mean,
I think
life,
so.
yeah, equal logos.
I would agree with that. Yeah. Yeah, I do kind of hesitate to merge maps. It can only go so far, right? But yes, I would agree. I would agree with that. And and then sticking with the Christian terminology, there had to be a manifestation. It had to come into the human world. It wasn't whatever that plan was, whatever that mystery of Golgotha was. It wasn't going to work until there was an incarnate version, that had to be born at a certain place and time, and had to eat hamburgers. Like I said, didn't have hamburgers back then, right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
So Paula, you being in Italy, it being 6 hours in the future, you go ahead and pose your question.
But actually, I'm at the moment I'm in London. That's
London.
So it's only 5 hours. I think I actually put a comment on your observation about Montagne, but I've been thinking, as you guys were discussing, about this notion of consciousness and how could that be investigated. And I think I have two thoughts. One is that before investigating it, we need to reintroduce it, so to speak, in the tradition of psychology, for example, which is a notion that has been kicked out a long time ago. Except I think the Russian tradition of theory of activity has always kept that notion quite central. So I wonder whether, yes, I think new technologies can indeed help us in investigating complex issues such as this, such as consciousness. But before thinking about the technology, I think we need to think about the fact that this is a notion that cannot be investigated or hasn't been recognized in the traditional psychology paradigm, and we need to, so to speak, give it a legitimacy as an object of investigation. And then we can also think of how to investigate it and whether new technologies can help us. Mm-hmm. And again, then the second thing, as I said, I wonder whether any of you would agree or that the tradition of theory of activity in Russia has indeed given the notion of consciousness a central position, at least with respect to to Western psychology. That's it.
Yeah, I don't know about the last thing. I can't speak to. I don't know if about, but what you started with about we first must reintroduce the idea. Yeah, for a while so with my work with the electric universe and the electric cosmology, yeah, like a lot of people who enter it, for the first 5 years, I kept arguing with other astronomers, right? And then something changed in me and most other people who you stop arguing because you're just wasting your time. Like, so it's almost like you need to start new. You need to start fresh, and not try to argue with people who only think about matter. I mean, yeah. So that's. I completely agree, and I certainly and I think a lot of others are putting our efforts there. We're no longer arguing with people about how consciousness gets created by matter. Like I'm no longer collecting experiments that prove that consciousness is separate from matter. Right? I've seen dozens of them, so I no longer need it proved to me. Consciousness is separate from matter. I now know that, and I think I probably always knew it, right? So we need to start there. Yeah, I would agree with that. But how to do that? I don't know. I'm trying. You know, we're several. But yeah, I agree. We have to start with that. We can't argue about it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's this idea, I think, based on what you're saying, that touches on the lack of appreciation over the reality of ideas. Because if you think about like an idea, even like a basic Platonic elementary idea, even though you can have many hexagonal expressions in nature, you know, and every snowflake forms this way, you could always say maybe a more perfect hexagon could be created. But that perfect hexagon, that idea of the hexagon in the absolute sense as a concept, is something which is not in the material domain. It's a thought. It's a concept that we can investigate, and we can make it larger and bigger with no end. There's no like the biggest hexagon you can imagine, or the smallest, right? Or a time before there was hexagon. And right. There's just this tendency, I think, in our society to dismiss the reality of ideas. People, if anything, just say, oh, they're abstractions, they're chemical excretions of the brain or something that we use to make, you know, make use of somehow, but they don't really think more deeply.
To acquire mates and win new territory.
Yeah, right. Spread our seed in the fight for survival. But yeah, like it's obvious, like these are ideas that are eternal, they're immortal, they're beyond space and time, but our brain is physically, it's temporal, it exists in space and time, it's bounded. So there's obviously the fact that these eternal immortal thoughts can exist within us. It means that they're not just the brain. Right there's an incommensurability that people just tend to not chew on enough. They don't like think about what that means, let alone justice or the bigger ideas.
Yep.
Kevin.
Yes. Well, hi, Dr. Clarage. First, thank you for your talk. Very good. Yeah. Very nice. I had a question regarding an idea that I heard like 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know if it's valid, or I just want to hear your thought about that. It's regarding the fact that the DNA has an helicoidal shape, you know, and as a matter of fact, most antennas these days that we use also have that helicoidal shape. So I heard from someone that I don't trust very much, but I thought that the idea was cool, that the DNA was acting as an antenna. And when you were talking earlier about this idea of the cell being both a transmitter and a receiver, do you think that there's some validity to that idea about the shape of the DNA?
I absolutely do. Without a doubt, I absolutely do. The shape is so specific, and I remember a while ago antenna makers using the. I didn't know that you're saying that's now Like that's the most common. And I assume you mean like for our devices, like our phones and our RFID chips and whatever.
Yeah, of course you're gonna see other shapes, and I quite frankly I don't remember why this shape in particular is good for receiving and transmitting, but I know that it's, you know, on your car, that's what you get, you know.
Yeah, right. So yeah, absolutely, and I think the work of Montagne kind of proves it. I mean, what other proof do you need? And yeah, like I said, it's so specific, and so it is an absolute mystery to contemporary science how like, you know, I eat an orange, and then somehow my certain cells in me produce more insulin, right? and we've mapped out a lot of the steps in that process. But anybody who studied the process feels very deeply that there's something we don't understand here, right? And we can try. So how does that piece of DNA get expressed, you know, to make insulin, right? When you put an orange in your mouth. And yes, I've thought it for many years. I'm sure plenty of other people have also, that right, there is very clearly some vibrational instructions going on, or right, the DNA is receiving something at a vibrational level. You cannot explain it with chemistry. You just can't. You can't explain it with chemistry. Yeah. And then you think about, like, you know, so we have this very limited view of what DNA is, right? Like from the 50s, we got the idea that it's genes. And we have since then, of course, have learned that there's so much more to this molecule, right? And so you can kind of get a picture. How do I put it? That, well, I'll have to work on this one. But there's something about.
Maybe I can add something to that. So, you know, when you get the chromosomes, women get both the X's, and basically the chromosomes are just long DNA strands that are just wrapped around themselves in a particular shape again. So I don't know, maybe there's this this purpose that's being brought about by the shape, or that's receiving information from a certain field, like the life field or the purpose field. I don't know how to call it. And even this idea of purpose, I don't know, like, does it fit more in the life aspect of your triangle, or in the form aspect?
Yeah, great. I have no idea. It's a great question. And I do know that the DNA responds to purpose. That I do know, crystal clear. And I have a few medical experiments that prove it, so to speak. The one that's simplest for me to kind of keep in my head is, this was in the 70s in, I think it was in Mexico, but it might have been Spain. And the doctor was okay. The punchline is he showed that he would touch. It was on the outside of the thigh, so he would touch the outside of the person's thigh with a little toucher, right? And if he had his subject be distracted by other things, like reading a book or watching a movie or whatever, then that was one experiment. The other experiment was he asked the subjects to pay attention to the touching on the thigh, and there was some purpose to it. Like you needed to do this because we're trying to heal your knee or whatever. There was some purpose to it. Then the body would grow new neurons right where there was touching. It would grow neurons within several days. And that completely upturned all theories of neurology up until then, which said that your nerves, they don't regrow, that they're done. You know, once you have your nerves in your brain, it's done, right? This whole theory, nerves don't regenerate. And so he went on to show to do other more complicated experiments, but it all came down to your body will only change if it has a purpose to. Once your body can sense, I don't know what words to use, the purpose, like what's the reason, why are we doing this? Your body responds immediately. it can grow nerves. It can change blood flow. It can, it's amazing what it'll do, but it needs to know that there's a purpose. It has to sense the purpose. It's incredible. It's so amazing to think that our bodies. I know the vocabulary gets very confusing here because we start separating ourselves from our bodies, which is always very confusing, right? How to even talk about that. But for the sake of talking about it, our bodies will do almost anything if the
mind that sets itself some purpose, it's gonna change the body to.
It'll change, and the body will gladly respond. The body will immediately respond.
Yes.
Happily respond. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. Oh, and that might be a good ending point. How did I write it? Let me see. Let me find it. Oh no, I remember it now. When your purpose changes, your shape changes. I didn't say that when I was doing my first presentation there earlier tonight, but I think it's a really important. When your purpose changes, your shape changes. And so what we were just talking about, Kevin and I, about the body, but I think it's a much bigger principle.
I think it's dual in nature, meaning that when you look at a tool, it has a certain shape, and just looking at the tool, if you've never encountered that tool before, you can surmise what its purpose is. But then again, when you create a tool, you have to have a purpose in mind before creating the tool, and that is gonna inform on the shape itself. So that's why I'm saying I don't know if the form and the purpose is two things or one.
Right, exactly. And so here we have this human being. We are all human beings that have a very particular shape, very particular form. So what is the purpose, right? What is the why have this? Why have this amazing instrument? I don't think it's to acquire mates and win territory. I think there's something else, right? So why this particular shape? What's the purpose of this particular shape?
Yeah, because you would think if you were purely radical Darwinian reductionist trying to make sense of why this shape and not some other shape, it wouldn't make a lot of sense, because compared physiologically to tigers and gorillas, we don't match up very well. Like most things in most predators would rip us to shreds very easily. But we do have, and I think Da Vinci did a lot of work experimenting on this question of why does the golden section express itself so clearly in all life, but most clearly in the geometry of the human form, in the Vitruvian man, And there's this idea of, I think also we're touching on the idea not only of cold utility, but also an idea of aesthetics in terms of the form. There's a certain expression of the golden ratio aesthetically, which most utilitarians would say that there's no purpose for aesthetics.
Right.
Maybe there is,
right.
if you're thinking about it differently. Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
So maybe we should end. This has been awesome, but maybe
this is wonderful. And I think that this, whatever the purpose is of human life, I think we're touching on it in the course of this last 2-hour session. And Paula even wrote saying, I noted that this is one of the longest sessions we've ever held, clearly indicating how rich and thought-provoking this lecture is. And I think, we all have this hunger, this deep hunger, which needs to be fed. Just like the body needs food, there's something deeper which hungers as well. And I think this is a buffet. It's the type of hunger though you can't really regret overeating.
Exactly, we've all overeaten, right? That's funny.
So thank you for feeding us, Dr. Clarage. This was a wonderful afternoon. Great Sunday experience.
Good to see everybody. Thanks a lot.
Great. And for next week, again at 2 o'clock, we'll either have a presentation either on something memorializing John F. Kennedy. It will be the anniversary of his assassination. Wow. So either there will be a presentation on that, or there'll be something on the need to have a Pythagorean revival, the revival of the Pythagorean method for the 22nd century. So, why jump ahead, right? 21st as well. So one of those two things are going to happen. People will know.
You've given up? You've given up on the 21st century?
No, I shouldn't do that. That's why I had to pull back a little bit here. Yeah. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, goodbye. Thanks a lot.
Bye, everyone.